Are you tired of seeing the raw edges of your seams inside of your clothes whenever you sew something? Well, let me show you how to fix that with using just your sewing machine. The seam that we're going to be doing is called a French seam. Unlike a regular seam, when you're sewing a French seam, you want to lay your fabric wrong sides together, and we're going to sew on the right side of the fabric. Since the French seam is going to encase that raw edge, we want to make sure the seam allowance for this first stitch is only half of the seam allowance that your pattern is requiring. In this case, I'm using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Next, you want to take a pair of scissors and you want to trim really close to that stitch line, but make sure not to cut through that stitch line. Take your time when you're doing this because I've messed up before and you don't want to do that. After that, you're going to open up your seam and we're going to fold it in half. Once it's folded, you can see how the seam looks from the inside, but remember it still has that raw edge from the outside. So we're going to sew one more stitch and that's going to encase that raw edge into that seam allowance. For the second stitch, you want to make sure you're also sewing with only 1/2 of your pattern's required seam allowance. And after you've sewn that second seam, then your French seam is completed. As you can see, that raw edge is fully enclosed and there's no more raw edges visible from the inside of your garment.